Hello, what a lovely place to reminisce, isn't it? I want to tell you about my grandfather. He was a blacksmith in Wareham in Trinity Lane. He died in 1953 at the age of 71. My father was apprenticed under my grandfather. He too was a blacksmith. But my father left and went and worked elsewhere and left the profession. Years later, I remember speaking to my father and saying, "What makes a craftsman?" And my father looked at me and said, "Your grandfather, he was a craftsman." But he said, "I never was." I thought it was an odd thing to say, so I said, "What do you mean, Dad?" He said, "Your grandfather, he worked from dawn to dusk. He enjoyed his job so much, it was a profession. Everything had to be done just right." He said that when he used to work with them, they used to argue a lot. He said, for instance, he said, "I remember one case when a man came in and he wanted 12 brackets made." He said they looked a basic enough bracket in my mind, but not with grandfather. He had to take the metal, he hammered it out, he put a twist in it, and he made an artistic bracket. And I said, "Father," I said, "all it is just a support. Why can't we just bend a piece of metal and drill some holes in?" And my grandfather said, "It's not today we're worried about," but he said in 50 years' time, he said, if somebody takes that building down and they see the brackets, he said, "I want to have something which we can be proud of, not just a bent piece of metal." My father can recall on one occasion when he wanted to go out early with friends in the evening, and he had to make some various things for a customer who was going to collect them the following morning early. And as he was about to leave, grandfather looked at the things which he'd made. He said, "You can't let the man have that. Look at that," he said. "That's not suitable," he said. And my father had to stay and start all over again until he got them up to granddad's standard. And that's what makes a craftsman, is the standard which they work. There's a lot of work which goes into it. Anyway, there's other things in life, and I must say I had a most enjoyable time in 1980 when I went to the Dorset Steam Engine Rally. There I saw a man called Dick Apps I'd never seen before. He was operating a pole lathe. This is something which fascinated me, and I thought I wouldn't mind having a go at doing something like that. And when I got home that evening, I went up to my garden and I realized I could make a lathe. I started to machine timber as I seen Dick do it. This was the start of a new venture for me, something different in life, which made me a lot of friends. In 1980, the first lathe I made in my garden. I used the bough of a sycamore tree to give me my power. And that was the thing which went up and down. It was called a pole lathe. Once upon a time, a pole would have gone in at an angle, coming up through there with a rope coming down, and I would have treadled it from there. But then the safety people came along and said if the rope should break and it flicked back and hit one of the members of the audience, they could sue you. Being a sue culture, so this had to be stopped. But anyway, I'll show you how I've overcome that problem by using this piece of elastic here. And I'll see now whether I'm going to make another leg very much like this one here. It's for a three-legged stool. The reason I like making three-legged stools is because as soon as they hit the ground, they pitch properly, where a four-legged stool can sometimes rock. So by making one, like this one I've got here, I'm going to show you, I'm going to make some more legs so I can make another stool of this nature. As a matter of interest, times have changed. This work on the edge has been done with a router. So that's another thing which has come along on the market, which unfortunately spoils the whole effect from a craftsman's angle. Here I've got some lovely planes here, which have been made up. These were used years and years ago before routers were invented. You can see the cutting edge there and the way they would work that around the wood. But like all things, the router has taken over. I'm going to make two more legs like this so I can make another of those stools. Now, to be fair and honest with you, I never realised at the time that these lathes were designed to work with green timber. And in 1977, you may recall, when the Dutch elm disease swept right through our country and all the elm trees were cut down, that table that was cut down in 1977, a lot of the wood was burnt. I could get elm with ease. Through ignorance, I started machining elm. I found it very difficult, but I managed to overcome that. Recent years, of course, the price of elm has gone right up now, but I still managed to get some mahogany offcuts, which is what I'm going to use today. I'm going to show you exactly how we do this. Now, everything is done on centres. That's from there to there. The longest leg I can make is 30 inches by taking this piece of equipment out. Using a rule, I mark my wood, crisscross it, so I get the centre there. There we are, as easy as that. So that's all it is, just mark the centres, placing the wood in a vise like so. We'll do this end here first. And using this drill here, that's all we need with that. So we've got our centres now ready to work off. So after marking the centres out, we now use a draw knife. This is a rather interesting one. This one was found in the Purbeck Hills. It's a blacksmith made one. What I'm going to do now is to take the corners off, to speed it up. Remember, this is mahogany which we're using, which is a very, very tough wood. And as a matter of interest, there are loads and loads of mahoganies. Different types, different ones. Once we've got the corners off, we can offer it up to the lathe then. One thing, a draw knife like this has got metal handles. There are many, many draw knives with wooden handles, but each one I've ever seen, they've always got the worm in them. This will never get the worm in it. Now we place this in like so. Now this is my chuck. This piece of rope here will go around the wood like that, on that pulley there, drop it down through. And that looks a bit complicated at the moment. Once it's set up, it is easy. We have another pulley there, and this is going to give us our power stroke. This will be the stroke. Slide it back through like that, and it'll trap itself. Now you see, as it goes round, the wood comes towards me. Now we can only cut when the wood comes towards me. On the way back, you have to remove the chisel and just take it back just a fraction. Now that is the process which we have to do right along the length of wood. When we get that far, we just turn the wood round and hold it in our chuck, which is this piece of rope again. In 1982, I started going to craft shows. This was rather amusing because I met lots and lots of holiday makers. And I met holiday makers which came from High Wycombe. And they surprised me because they told me that this sort of lathe was worked in the forest around High Wycombe, where beech was very plentiful. The way they harvested the beech is the same as the way they harvest the hazel, which the hurdle maker makes. They only cut a certain amount of growth away, leaving the plant there all the time, so about every 9 years they can come round and there will be more growth, so they can harvest it each time. So therefore they're never going to run out of material. I'd like to go and meet Alan Brown now, whose great-great-great-grandfather became a hurdler and started the company in the 18th century.
I'm cutting off gads now, ready for spar making. When we cut the wood in the morning and turned it enough, we knock off the bottom, the butt, to use for gads for spar making. And these are the gads. Generally nice and straight, no knots in them. And then when the thatcher comes to twist them, they won't break in his hand. Generally about 2'6" long, so by the end you finished off with a spar about 2'4". And that's what most thatchers seem to want these days. When they had to thatch ricks, it was 3 foot long. That's the gads ready for the spar making. I'll put them down by my side. Got my naps, leather naps. Protect the legs. You buy a bit of leather from the cobbler if you've got a cobbler these days. Soak it in baby oil, make it nice and supple. Couple of straps, and there we are, there's the naps. What you do, you trim off all the knots that you've got there, enter the end, straight down through. The gad was big enough for 4, you can get up big as you like really, 7 or 8. I've heard of people using bigger, but I like about 4, 6, 8, that's fine. Good point, 3 hits to make a good point. The old fellas used to say, if you can get 3 chips in the air at once, you're going the right speed. And the ideal thing is 1,000 a day if you can. I've heard of up to 1,500. A pleasant enough job, but it's hard going. By the end of the day, every muscle will ache. I wouldn't want to be a full-time spar maker. Or okay for an hour or two. There's still quite a demand for it. Luckily there's still a fair few houses being thatched these days. And so there's still a fair demand for them. Most of mine go Devon way. This wood was cut back in February, so it is nice and dry, no sap in it. Although it's nearly July now, it's still working very well, still nice and white. And should give good service once it's in the thatch. You don't want the spar too thick, makes it hard work for the thatcher. Don't want it too thin either. And you want it straight down through so there's no weak bits in it. If you do have weak bits in it, when the thatcher tries to get it into the thatch, it will break and make them cuss.
Well, I think at last we found out where the noise of the wood's coming from. Because here's a man in the middle of this place, sat outside a little tin shed. The job as I get through here. And here he is working away here all by himself.
How'd you find me there then?
We're in here. I'm just wondering what you're actually doing.
Well, making spars for the thatchers. There's quite a few thatchers around here now. And the wood we use for hurdle making is also used for spar making. And so see what they do, give it a little bend there and twist it. There we go.
So that twists
and then it won't break.
Now that's just driven down into the actual thatch itself.
That's right. That'll hold it there.
Does that'll spring out as it goes in?
It shouldn't do. It would go in and a certain amount it would, but it should go in straight and it will hold there.
So if he wanted to pull it out, would it be much stress to pull it out? Or?
Not really, no.
No,
It's firm as it is, and once it's in with all the others, it's best left alone.
just holds it there.
That's right.
It's an amazing job, isn't it? Can I have a look at the cutting tool you've got there, please?
Yeah, it's a spar hook.
That's a spar hook.
Yeah.
So you can buy these anywhere?
Not now, no. That was father's. Might even been grandfather's. My father used to use it, and when father died and I took it up, then I took on his hook.
So you inherited that?
I inherited one of the heirlooms. Yeah.
No, you've got no electric grinder or anything here. How do you keep this
No,
sharp?
no. Well, what we use, bit of Welsh slate look. That's all we use. Something very soft, and then by using that, you don't wear your hook out. You just sharpen it.
So you just put a face to it.
That's all. I'll just show you if you like.
So it's not a whetstone?
No, I suppose just a slate really that you could use oil on, but we haven't got oil, so we use nice bit of spit. That's as good as any. Hold it like that, then you won't cut your hand, and gently put the edge on like that.
Across like that.
Yeah.
So not like a file.
Not like a file. No, just there we go. Nice round movement, and turn it over. Keep the blade away from you.
Could you feel a burr there on the other side if you didn't take that?
No, you won't get a burr with this. This would just finish it off, like the barber used to use on his leather strop. It's a similar sort of thing, really, and you don't put that wire along there. No, you don't wear it. As I say, it may be 100 years old, but it's still in good nick.
Alan, so you've taken over from your father and your grandfather to keep tradition in the family, and I believe you've got a son who's doing the work as well.
Yeah, that's right, Steve. He's been with me 10, 11 years now, but he works 3 or 4 miles out over on another copse because we prefer to work alone, but we get on very well together, actually.
I'm sure you do. So you trained your son?
Yeah, I trained Steve right from the very start. He started off when he was pretty young, really. Went away to university and worked in London for a couple of years, and decided he wanted to come on back to this. And a friend of mine was going sort of semi-retired, and I managed to get hold of half of his wood. In fact, we've got it all now, and so Steve can work quite well on his own in his own copses, and I can stay on my own.
So what you say when you say about copses is that what you've cut today will grow again by 7 years' time, be ready for cutting again.
That's right, it will, yeah. What we want roughly, a hurdle maker and make a few spars, you want 4 acres a year roughly. So over 7 years, 28, 30 acres is what you need to keep a living going all the time. And that's about what we've got. We have 60 acres between us, and we look out to that for the landowners. They're good enough to let us come in there. We look out to it for them, so that in 7 years' time, it's okay for us or anybody else who comes in.
Well, there you are, Alan. Look after that. Nice to see you. I've got to look for your son. All the best.
Thanks, nice seeing you. Thanks for dropping in.
As I make my way past the hazel that is waiting to be harvested, we will meet Steve, who will explain what tools he requires to demonstrate the art of hurdle making.
These are the tools, mainly the hooks that we'll use when we're making hurdles. There's 5 different ones that we use generally, 4 for the hurdle making and 1 for making spars. The first of these is the cutting hook. It's fairly heavy in weight with a sharp edge, used for all the cutting of the wood. You like a nice heavy hook for that, because when you swing the hook for the cut, you want the weight of the hook to carry it through the rod as you're cutting it. The next hook is the turning out hook. There's various names for this. Ridding out hook, I like to call it a turning out hook. It's got a long beak, so that when you're stood doing the turning out, you don't have to bend so far to pick something up. You can use the length of the hook to pick up. That one's kept fairly sharp. It's mainly used for trimming the rods into the shape that you want, whether it's taking the knots off, taking any branches off, or cutting it to length. The splitting hook, that one's never sharpened, although it does keep a fairly nice edge. It's polished on the end, just from where it's used to split the rods, and it slides down through, and just the action of it sliding through the rods gives it a nice polish either side. It's quite a heavy weight. just to keep balance, and it's quite comfortable to use. This is the most specialist of the hooks that we'll use. This is the hurdle hook. This one's kept razor sharp on the end. It's specifically shaped like that, with a blade right to the end, so that you can trim the hurdle off. You can cut near twists without damaging the twists. The bulk of its use is just using that sharp flat bit on the end, and that you like a nice weight behind that, but you need to be able to judge the length of it when you're using it, so that you don't overhit and hit something that you shouldn't be cutting. This is the Joe that we use for hurdle making. It's literally a lump of very hard ash cut into the shape when it's fresh cut. The heavier the better. It's used for pushing rods down whilst you're actually making the hurdle, and bumping in uprights and keeping the shape in the hurdle if it starts to get a little bit too wide or a little bit too narrow. That's probably about 10 years old. It's got a nice crack in it now, which means at some point it'll split, and we start to use another one. Finally, the spar hook. This is used for making spars for thatching. Again, this one's kept razor sharp. It's nicely polished from where it's been used for a lot of splitting down through the gads to split the gad, ready to make the spar. This one's kept razor sharp for putting a point on the end. A nice clean point is needed on a spar, so that it slides down through the thatch without doing any damage on the way. This one needs to be quite light because you're using it very quickly. A good spar maker can make 1,000 to 1,500 spars in a day, and so he needs not to be suffering with the weight of the hook if it's making his arms ache just by the weight of it. So it needs to be nice and sharp but very light. The wood we use is generally about 7 years old, depending on how quickly it grows. What we do when we're cutting, we've got the cutting hook, and we use an upward stroke to leave a nice clean finish on the mock that's left in the ground. To cut away some of the rubbish, save hitting my hands. Once it's cut, it's just laid on the ground in a string. So once we've done the cutting, all the wood is left on the ground until we're ready to use it. Each collection of shoots, if you like, is called a mock, and they can be anything from 2 or 3 pieces of wood growing, anything up to 30, 40, possibly 60, depending on how large the root system is that actually feeds the mock. Depending on the time of year, once the wood is cut, we'll leave it anything from 2 weeks through to possibly 6 months before we actually use it. In that time, it's obviously exposed to the elements, so the wood that's cut in January and February may deteriorate quite quickly as a result of a warm spring. So having cut the wood a few weeks previous, we come to the string to pick out the wood we're going to use. This string was cut probably about 4 months ago. It's cut when the sap is out, so it's part of our dry wood. This wood it's getting a bit dry now, but it's still fairly workable. And what we're looking for is either uprights to make the vertical sails in the hurdle, rods to split and put in the main part of the hurdle, or round rods to put in the bottom of the hurdle and to tie it off at the end. The hook I'm using is the turning out hook. It's got the beak to save having to bend so far. What we're doing with on each rod is trimming the knots off, taking off all the unnecessary shoots that we won't be able to use. So each rod, once it's ready, it's one straight piece, hopefully, ideally about 8 foot long, of a reasonable size that can either be split or used as in the round. All the waste is just left at the side. There was a time we used to burn it all up out of the way, but now we tend to leave the spray, all the waste on the ground across the mocks to keep the deer out of the way, so that they don't browse on the shoots and damage the new growth. Going back a little bit further, the spray would have been bundled up into faggots and sold to the baker to burn in his ovens, so that nothing was wasted. Everything that was cut had a use. One other bright byproduct when we're turning out is gads, which are used to make spars for thatching. It's literally a 2 to 3 foot length, generally off the bottom of the rod, and then that is bundled up into bundles of sort of 20 or 30, and then tied up and carried away from the wood. That's one of the only products that we do actually take out of the wood, other than the hurdles. From the position I'm standing, I can reach every product that I'm producing. The uprights are placed to my left, spray is generally placed to my right, and the two different types of rods that we're looking for are put directly behind me, one on the right, one on the left. Historically, many hurdle makers suffered with a bad back. The theory was that whilst turning out in the mornings, they spent their whole time in a slightly crouched position so that they didn't have to keep bending to reach down. The story was that from spending so long crouched, this caused their backs to deteriorate. It was a time-saving measure that they used in order to be able to make more hurdles over the course of each day. Once the rods are prepared, it's necessary to split them. Using the splitting hook, once you've entered the rod, it's just a case of easing it down through the middle of the rod. You're not actually cutting the rod, you're just prising the two halves apart. Generally it will follow the grain and go right the way down through the middle. If it runs out, it just takes a little twist of the hook to bring it back into the middle. The hardest part is the initial cut to get into the middle of the rod. It looks more dangerous than it actually is. The movement of the hook is quite controlled. It's not a wild swing that could result in cutting myself. The left hand's far enough away that if I miss, the worst thing I'm going to do is bruise my leg, because that is actually blunt on the beak. Some of the woods that we use are what we call giddy, and the wood grows like a corkscrew right down through, and so as you split it, the wood twists round and round on itself, makes it very hard to use. If the wood is in good condition, and not too many knots in it, you can still use it. Otherwise it's a case of putting it to one side and leaving nature to take its course on it. The gallows is where we store everything that we're going to use whilst we're making the hurdle. It's literally an ash pole resting on two forked sticks, raising everything from the ground so that they're up out the undergrowth and anything that could get in the way. At one side we start with the splitting hook. That's kept in the end of the gallows, just so it's up out off the ground, so it doesn't get buried and lost. We keep it close to hand in case we need to split any rods partway through making the hurdle. Once the rods are split, we come to the main part of the job, which is actually making the hurdle. A standard garden hurdle has 9 uprights. The uprights in the middle of the hurdle are always split, and the two on the end are always used in the round and split because they're slightly more substantial like that. Making a hurdle is like weaving. It's literally a case of putting the rod in front of one upright and then behind the next, working your way right the way along, and then start on another piece and doing exactly the opposite. Most of the skill in making a hurdle is involved in actually keeping the shape of the hurdle, so it's 6 foot wide at the top as well as 6 foot wide at the bottom, and also a reasonable shape. When the rods were split, they're always left in pairs, or the last part of the rod is not split, so you can always use the two halves of the same rod side by side. That way, if you get a big rod, you always use the two halves opposing each other, rather than if you use them separate, you'd run the risk of always having heavy rods on one side, light rods on the other side, and you end up with an unusual shaped hurdle. When the hurdle's finished, it's necessary to trim all the ends off to give it a nice clean finish. To do that, we use the knobbing off hook, or the hurdle hook, with the blade right to the end. It's literally just a case of taking all the ends off and tidying it up to make a good clean finished product. We always use a hook rather than secateurs because it provides a much better finish and it's much quicker. When all of the ends are trimmed off, the hurdle is ready to go to the customer. There's 3 here that were made yesterday. All the ends have been trimmed and it's all finished and been tidied up exactly as we like them. That's what they should look like when they're finished.
There we are, we've got that round now, and that's the same size as this one here using the calipers. So now we're ready to mark out the leg so we can start producing the leg. So by placing the wood like so, we'll release this first from our chuck. Placing the wood on like so, using the pencil. Just marking like that, that's all we have to do. Now this is the part there which will go inside the actual seat. This is the joint, so the joint is most important that it is firm, because naturally that's where all the weight is taken. Now the original bodgers, they were so clever that they didn't have to mark out, they knew exactly what they were doing through experience. The tool we use now is to go down through. Now we carry on using that until we get the desired size which we want. It's a long process, but there is a lot of job satisfaction at the end of it. So I'm going to carry on doing that now until I've got the part which is ready to go inside the stall. Another trade that hasn't changed is the trade of the thatcher. The thatcher still uses the same tools as he would have done hundreds of years ago. The only difference with the thatcher today is, unfortunately, we cannot use our own thatch. These reeds have to be imported into this country. They come from all over the world.
I was born in Dorset, in a little village called Winthrop Newburgh, and I've been thatching for 28 years. I've worked all over the Dorset area. I do about 8 to 12 of these thatch roofs a year, depending on the size of the cottage itself, but mainly this type. I've always wanted to work outside. I didn't want to work in an office or anything like that. My father used to work on the farm, But when I was at school, I was lucky enough to be in the careers office, and there was an advert in the careers office for a trainee thatcher, which was locally. He was only 3 miles from where I was living at the time, so I thought, well, yeah, I'll give that a go. And once I started it, I couldn't do anything else really. Right, this particular reed I've got here today is from Hungary, and we also import it from Turkey and Poland, Austria, and I think there's some Chinese reed coming in at the moment. It's a good quality reed, and the longevity of it is about 25 to 30 years plus, put on a thickness of about 12 to 14 inches. So I'm just going to throw a few of these up, ready to start hatching. Right, these are hazel spars, and these are twisted to form the fixings for the new layer of thatch to go on. They actually go through the top layer of thatch and penetrate into the undercoat, which in turn holds the reed onto the roof. So this particular reed I'm using here is it's Hungarian reed, and we used to use reed grown locally in the backwaters of Poole Harbour and across to Weymouth, Lodmore, the backwaters of Lodmore. But the RSPB have taken back so much of the reed beds that we now have to import it. And I think that the quality of the reed that we import today is as good as any. And I'm just dressing this reed into the shape of the roof with a tool called a biddle or a legget. This is the biddle that we use. It's a square piece of aluminium with grooves running down from top to bottom. And when you turn the biddle over, it picks up the ends of the reeds and dresses all the reeds into the position you want them to be. This part of the country in Dorset, we call it a biddle, but elsewhere they call it a legget. I'm just pushing these spars into the undercoat, which gives it a firm holding, and then I just touch it up as I come through. And then we go on to the next bundle, and we lay it side by side, put our pins in, and we hold a little bit of a hand between the two layers. And what we do is we run our hand between the 2 layers of thatch and roll it in so that we get a nice joint. And then we just tap it into shape. And then I'll get what we call a temporary swathe, which is a piece of reed with some little crooks, and we poke them into the roof, and that just temporarily holds it while we can twist a few more spars. We always push our spars uphill so that any water that penetrates doesn't run down the spar and into the roof space. So you always keep the spars running uphill. On the modern roof today, we would use galvanised bar and stainless steel wires. But because we're going over an old roof, we're fixing it with hazel spars. There's 1 or 2 spar makers in the Dorset area, and they're getting harder to find now. Of course, years ago, we'd be doing this all off a ladder. But where health and safety is now involved in everything we do, it's made our lives much easier by doing it off scaffolding, plus it's safer. This one I've been here on my own, and I've been here now for just over 3 weeks, so by the time I've finished I think it's going to look more like a month to 5 weeks fully completed, so weather permitting of course. I think you're looking between £8,000 and £10,000. for a job of this size. Well, what I'm doing now, I'm opening a bundle of wheat straw, and I'm turning the ears end to end so that you've got both the thickness either end, so that when we break it and bend it in the middle, it's equal at both sides, and that will go cover both sides of the ridge at the apex to keep the water from penetrating through. This one's going to be an ornamental decorative ridge, and it's going to be about 5 inches thick, mainly of wheat straw and fixed down with hazel spars, and then it'll all be wired in to keep the birds from ripping it to pieces. The water doesn't penetrate the actual coatwork. What it does, it's on an angle of probably no less than 45 degrees, and the water just drips off each individual reed, and when it gets to the actual bottom of the coatwork, it drips off then. There is a Dorset star ridge which is flush with the actual coatwork. It's not the raised ridge, and they try to keep that in Dorset. It's got the crisscross pattern on the top, but it's all the same level as the actual thatch itself. It's not raised up off the thatch like what I'm putting on this one. This is a final article, and the ridge will probably need to be replaced 8 to 10 years, and the actual coatwork should go on for about 30 years without any problem at all.
Andrew must get a lot of job satisfaction at the end of the day to be able to stand back and look at his work and to think, I did that. So this is the most important part, getting this part machined correctly, because as I say, the hole which will be bored into the base of the seat, this is the part which will go in there. So I'm happy with that. We've started working along here now. So next I've got to scallop that down, scoop out the centre, then we'll reverse and do the other end. So I've got something to carry on with, but while I'm doing that, I want to take you back to the 1600s, when a cottage industry at that time was making buttons. This was a thing which, such as Corfe Castle, a very small little town village. A lot of the ladies would work from their cottages manufacturing Dorset buttons. And a person very much like with the bodger lathe come round to collect the legs, he would come and collect the buttons and take the buttons back to London where they'd be stitched onto garments. Everything worked well, like all things, until 1851, when a Mr. Ashton at the Great Exhibition designed a machine that could manufacture buttons. Unfortunately, at the end of the 1800s, the cottage industry had disappeared. The machine had taken over. But there's still people about who carry on making buttons, which is rather nice because they see how we used to live.
My name is Marion Howard and I live in Swanage. We came to live in Swanage over 30 years ago, and soon after I came here, someone taught me how to make a Dorset button. I'd never seen one before, but I'd done a lot of needlework and I found it very interesting and learnt how to make them, and I soon found there was a very interesting history to the whole thing, which had started in 1620, and there were other Dorset buttons besides the simple crosswheel that I had just learnt to make. This is going to be a simple crosswheel button, which is the one that everyone recognises as a Dorset button. A ring is covered with thread, and then you wind around the spokes like this, as many spokes as you like, and do a cross stitch in the middle, fairly tight. That makes all the spokes tidy, back and front. And after that, the ring has to be covered with back stitching until you've completed the whole ring. In other places and in other countries, people made buttons out of rings and thread, but because these buttons were very well marketed in the 18th century, this was why Dorset buttons became so famous and were actually exported at that time. In modern times, we put more pattern into the buttons, which they didn't do in olden times. The pattern comes by working over 2 spokes at a time instead of 1. So I cover 2 spokes and go up in front of the next 2 spokes. And in doing that, you get a pattern that comes. This one here is a further adaptation by putting beads into it. Before you wind the spokes, you thread the beads on and then incorporate them as you need them in the button. So you get results like this one. And perhaps that one. The history of the buttons is very interesting. It started in about 1622 with a man called Abraham Case, who set up making buttons, and the first ones he made were the high tops, and they soon became popular in the courts in London. And then a more flattened version called a Dorset knob was made, and this was the same technique, and they're made on a little disc of sheep's horn with padded muslin and then embroidered afterwards. A softer button was needed for the children's clothes, and so bird's eyes were invented. These have got pearls in the middle, but of course they didn't to start with have pearls. They were just a round, soft button. And then singletons were made. Some people came to work for Abraham Case called Singleton. Whether the button was made in honour of them or whether they invented it, no one can tell. But they're fabric buttons made over a ring and padded. Sometimes they have embroidery in the middle. And then we went on to the crosswheel buttons. Those were the last one that came at the turn of the century, about 1700. And they were the ones that became really popular, and they were done as a cottage industry all through the 18th century. Modern embroidery uses all sorts of different techniques, and the Dorset buttons are used quite a lot in modern embroidery. These have all been made into jewellery, a necklace, brooches, and several pairs of earrings. This is a more elaborate box with a lot of Dorset buttons. All the 4 techniques are there somewhere, and some modern ones as well. Over the years I have been asked to make several buttons for films. They only want usually just one costume or perhaps 2, because film companies like to be very authentic with what they have done. I was asked to do some for the first Harry Potter film, which was quite exciting. I was asked to do, first of all, some buttons for the John Hurt character, quite simple singleton buttons that had to be designed to match the fabric. And then they found these were interesting, and so they said, could I do a rush job and do some for one of the ghosts in the film? So I did. I had to work very hard because the costume had 110 buttons on one costume. It was made in silk with very special braid, and the buttons had to be designed specially. And they had to be made in 5 days and sent overnight to be done so that they could get on with the costume. So we went to see the film, very excited about the buttons. And eventually we saw the ghost floating ethereally across the top of the dining tables for 3 seconds. I was also asked to do some for the second Harry Potter film, for the character that Richard Harris played. They sent me some lace, which is here in the photograph, and I had to design buttons to match the lace. So we went to see the second Harry Potter film, looking for Richard Harris in his nightshirt. Sadly, he had died before the film has finished, and that scene was cut out. So making buttons for films can be very frustrating. I also made some for Master and Commander, which was the Russell Crowe film. They had to be specially researched at the V&A because they were for, I think they were Napoleonic sailors, and they had to be done in 3 different qualities of thread depending on the characters in the film and their ranks. So we went to see that film as well. Very action-packed, very exciting. Because during the filming they had sent for more buttons. I'd already done 250 and they wanted more buttons because the costumes had to be washed and laundered and ready for the next fight scene. So eventually I made over 370 buttons for the film, and we went to see the film too. It was very exciting. And we looked for the sailors' shirts. And the sailors had their shirts, the buttons were down the neck and on the sleeves. Most of the time they had their collars back and the sleeves rolled out, and we only saw 4 buttons. But whatever the frustrations of making buttons for films, there's still the satisfaction of making a really good garment. And because they are so well made, all these clothes, I'm sure will be used in many further productions. So it hasn't been a complete waste, although disappointing sometimes when you see the films.
You know, it makes me smile when I do this wood turning, because you think of flat packs. But years and years ago, when the early settlers went to America, flat packs were made of chairs, and they were taken over to America in the bilge of boats in these kits. They even came with the glue. You know, being in the Purbeck Hills is rather exciting. And I always think about 1934, when Tony Hancock, he went to the Dalston Court School. And poor old Hancock, I used to love his humour. And I can remember hearing him say on the radio now, "Stone me, stone me." And I think whilst we're in the Purbecks, we should see a stonemason.
I'm a local stonemason, Alan Davis. I'd like to introduce myself to you because I'd like to be able to show you some of the traditional methods of working Purbeck and Portland stone, as well as to perhaps some of the newer modern methods. There's various aspects to my trade. It's very varied. It can be just dressing stone for a building, which is quite a relaxing part of the business actually. You don't have to think about too much when you're doing that, and it's quite enjoyable. But there are things that are far more intricate, down to some delicate carving, perhaps on a fireplace or a tombstone. I obtained my stone from the local quarries. I remember when I first came to the Purbecks back in 1978, there was something like 15 different quarries then. They weren't anywhere near, or most of them weren't anywhere near as mechanised as they are today. Quite often I purchased my stone here at Kevin Keats's quarry, which is on the Worth Road, not far from Acton. One of the quarries that's remaining today. It's about 7 now. Kevin gets some nice stone here, and this is a piece of Downs vein here, which he'll probably use for flooring. He's got quite a few different types of stone. There's Purbeck freestone, which I tend to use quite a lot, and it's very sought after. Use it for mullions in windows or fireplaces. If you can get a big stone to cut one out of, you can make a nice carved fireplace from freestone, and it's a nice colour as well. Sometimes we use the thornbacks and Whitsun beds for memorials and memorial seats, and many other things also. Although I tend to purchase stone for things like memorials and fireplaces and things like that, and restoration work now, the quarries actually produce stone for a lot of other things. There's a lot of walling stone, which is natural riven walling, which can be, and also crazy paving or riven paving. Lots of different types of stones, over 40 different stones that can be quarried and used, and I should imagine Kevin's probably got about 10 of them or something like that up here that he's using at the moment. It's all open cast quarrying. There's a hole down just about 150 yards down there, and it's all open cast, and it's quarried with a 360 machine or a Komatsu, something with tracks. It's quite a nice smell actually when they quarry the stone. It's never been to the surface for a long time, and it's quite an unusual smell. And I think probably most quarrymen are a bit odd because they tend to like that sort of smell. Okay, this is the freestone. Freestone is named really because the stone can be used in and out of its natural bed. It was regarded as one of the better stones from the quarrymen when they used to dig the stone underground, and when it's out of bed you can make some nice long mullions out of it, much more than you could using the thickness of the bed, because quite often it's quite thin, whereas you've got it's a lot longer. These are quite small pieces actually of Purbeck freestone. You can get them up to 10 tons in size, or you used to be able to, but it just depends where the quarry is at the time and when they're quarrying. So I use freestone. I like to use it, and it's a nice stone. This is one of Kevin Keats's machines that he uses for quarrying the stone. I think his son Kevin drives it, and they use it down there in that open cast quarry that we just looked at earlier to remove the overburden off of the top, and costs you an awful lot of money if you had to hire one, but that's Kevin's anyway. This stone here has been put back. It's a rockery stone. It's ranging in size from about 100 weight up to about 500 weight, which is about 250 kilograms, isn't it? Something like that. Rockery used to get good rockery, you'd want a joint. The quarry would need to be a joint. That's where there's a natural fault, and then the stone would have been broken up perhaps when it was softer under the ground, and it would form quite unusually shaped rockery. They do get quite a lot of rockery in amongst the better stone too, and as you can see, Kevin's obviously stacked back quite a pile here. I should imagine there's about 50 to 100 tons here. And just behind the rabbit there, I think there's some Whitsun beds there stacked up, and they'd be put back really for the saw to slab down. They're very, very thin actually, those Whitsun beds. It's much better when the stone's thicker, because then when you put a stone on, you'll get 2 or 3 slabs out of it. That stone's quite soft too, but it's still useful. It's still got its uses, but not as good as it could be. Yeah, those are circular saws. One's for cutting the block down, the larger one. Some of the quarries have frame saws, big frame saws, but Kevin tends to go with the circular saws. His stone's not too big. And then the smaller one really just for finishing off really. I've been working in the trade now for more than 25 years. I've been living in this particular place now for 19 years, and in the Purbecks a lot longer than that. And I made just one bird bath to go out the front, and we started from that, and here we are today. Well, this is a piece of Purbeck cap, which caps they used to use it an awful lot for making curbstones in the Swanage years ago, when they used to make curbstones from stone. They tend to use concrete today. I tend to, whenever I've got a piece of stone, whether I'm making a headstone or a seat, quite often you get an offcut, and I tend to sling those back a little bit. And this is a piece of cap which is an offcut, and it's a very nice piece of stone. It's about 10 inches there, and I'd like it to be approximately half. I'm going to split it this way. If you lift the stone up and keep your hand approximately in the middle, we're going to hit the stone here, and it should crack back to my hand. That's one of the ways we split the stone up to about 4 inches thick. So it should just take one tap really. It didn't go quite as straight as I wanted it to, but I can dress a face on that just the same. I just want to put a little straight end on there, so I'm going to do that now. I always start when I'm about to dress with part of the chisel over the edge of the stone. If I had it in here, it would take the corner off. So I always start with it just over the edge of the stone. First of all, I will pitch this end. I will then take half of that distance back so that I can then line those two up. I will then turn the stone over and square up the stone on this face here. This is a very hard piece of stone because it's got chert in it. Chert is extremely hard, it's like flint. And now I'm going to pitch this face up here, this end, so that both of the ends of this stone now are square to the bed. Both ends are square to the bed. And that will give me now, if you look at this face, this surface here, it's an undulating surface. I'm going to just work those two from one to the other to give me a straight face, keeping the pitching tool away from me so that I get a little bit of rock on the face of the stone. So I'll just do that. And then that's that side then. I also do the other side. The other side's quite straight anyway, but just to take just the little pieces off. Didn't actually need to do all of that face because it's quite straight. Traditionally, you would have made a yard of stone, which dressed like that, perhaps about 4 to 6 inches on its natural bed, depending on whether it's going into a building or into a fireplace. And a yard of stone was something like 54 inches long by 2 foot high. It's very similar to a metre of stone today. And you would have got paid by the yard when you were doing that. Remember when I first started doing it, I was getting paid about £2 £2.75 a yard for dressing stone. What we'd do now is we'd have a look perhaps at this stone here, which is fairly much really as the stone came out of the ground. You can see the clay still on it, which gives it this sort of yellow colour. Whereas once you've dressed the stone, you can see I've dressed a line along here with the pitching tool. Once you've dressed into the stone, you can see the true colour there of the stone. This is a piece of Whitsun bed, which is it. You can see it's much harder here than it is here, just by the colour of it. It's darker in colour than it is here, so it's harder here than it is here. Don't know if you can see that, but there's a little bed there, just there, which would run right down through. That's a natural cleave line there, and there is a cleave line there. It's quite tight, but it is a cleave line. The actual bedding is actually running this way, in line with these lines that I've drawn on. It's running through there. So this is the top of the stone, and this is the bottom of the stone. It's quite a large piece of stone. It measures, what, 13 inches by just over 14 inches there. And if I was to, I wanted to select a pedestal or a stem to make a bird bath with, I would need perhaps to be able to split this stone down to a more suitable size. They used to have two different ways of doing this locally. Up at Langton they would always use this method, which was by putting little pits into the stone to split them. And down at Swanage, at Coombe or Bell Street, they used to put much wider ones in, and they used to use gads, which were like pieces of metal sort of with a sharp end and a blunt end, really, like a wedge of cheese. They used to use gads down in town. So you can always tell, really, if you come across an old piece of stone, perhaps where the masons had learned their trade from, because they tended to do that. There's two different ways, whether they were the ones that worked at the top of the hill up at Langton or down in Swanage. It's just a matter of getting down as much, probably about 1.5 inches in depth. And the hole in this stone here wants to be wider inside of the pit than it is at the top, just so that the chisel grips in the hole a little bit when we put it in a moment. You think this chisel has got a sharp side and a blunt side. You can see that it's wider one way than it is the other, and you'd think it would go down in there like that, wouldn't you, so that it was trying to split it with its sharp edge. But actually you put them in the other way. Yeah, and it's tightening up a little bit. There it is, it's tight now. Could probably do with being a little bit deeper, and we would need to put another one in here. So we'd have two in. We might even need to get one in on the side on this one, about here, and then we should be able to split that stone down. Yeah, I've put this hole in by hand cutting, which is an old technique, and I've also, if you noticed, I've put some cuts in with a grinder, which is a more modern technique really, and but it still comes down to putting a chisel in and splitting the stone down with a hammer or a sledgehammer. Actually the hammer is called a biddle, and a chisel. So and that's the process that used to be used an awful lot, and I still use it from time to time. The end result with this stone wasn't quite what I wanted really, but it's still usable. It's funny, my business really, because one year you're making signs for houses and you can be making an awful lot of them, and you think, well, what happened to the rest of the trade? And another year you can be making fireplaces for houses and carving those, or doing restoration work on certain buildings, building dry stone walls, or walls with mortar in, or lime built walls. I can spend time, sometimes I'll have a run on perhaps just making memorials. People might leave them for a number of years while they get over their emotions, and then they'll want a memorial stone carved when they can face that. Make a lot of seats. This year I've made 2 or 3 seats, and I've been quite busy on that, so it's very varied. If you, especially with the Purbeck stone these days, because the quarries have been limited to where they can quarry, it's harder to get the stone, and that's driven the price up. Certain layers or beds of stone, for instance the Purbeck Thornback, is very sought after, and therefore everybody's trying to have a piece, want a piece of nice Purbeck stone, and they want a piece of Thornback, and the demand's very high, and therefore the price is very high to start off with. For instance, if you wanted me to make you a 5-foot seat bench with armrests in the back and that, and dressed, and some lettering on it in Thornback, we'd probably be looking at about £2,000 or £3,000 for that. Whereas perhaps if we chose a different layer, we could perhaps bring that down to £1,200 to £1,500. You'd still end up with a very nice seat, but it all comes down to the choice of the customer, really. Made just about every bird bath that you could ever make. And I got to the stage where I was absolutely fed up with them for a long time. But now I don't make so many of them. I don't mind just making the ordinary ones again. Ordinary sort of rustic one. So yeah, I mean, this is just pretty much a standard bird bath, really. Or sundial this is going to be, isn't it? We're going to make it into a sundial now. I like to make a sundial with a 6 or 7 inch base and 4 or 5 inch top there on the stem. And that means if I've got a stone which is only 6 by 6 to start off with, it's quite tight, so there's less to pitch off in the first place. When you do have to put the tool marks on it, like this punching here, you have to do it in a way that it will look effective. You can't just punch it all off willy-nilly, so it's just putting the punches in position that you leave it, leaving a nice sort of pretty pattern, really, so it looks effective. I'm just going to set this up now. Really want somewhere flat, really, but that's it's not, that top does want a little bit more work on it actually, but that'll be okay. So I am engraving this now, and this is Roman type lettering, and I'm doing it on an Insimar machine, which is incised the letter a little bit like a router. You need to go down into the letter a couple of times to get it down to the depth that you want it with the router, and it's quite a nice neat letter. I've got about 6 or 7 different types of lettering. I do hand cut letters as well, which means there's no limit to the different styles that you can use. The difference between the Insimar machine and the hand lettering is you get a nice incised V-cut letter. The future for Purbeck stone, I wonder. I mean, the National Trust, they own the quarries now, and I think they prefer the quarries to remain quite small. They don't want them to become big, businesses. I hope that they'll leave more than one quarry in the future, because if it goes down to one, the price is going to skyrocket. And I think even now the quarries, they turn out stuff with the saws. They've not got so many masons working generally now as they used to have. I remember talking to an old boy perhaps 25 years ago who was a quarryman. He was 76 then, and he was telling me that the field next to him, that was probably about 15-20 acres, the field, he can remember a time when there was 700 masons working in that field, and that was just one quarry. And obviously the whole area was covered in quarries at that particular time. There was hundreds of quarries. And now, as I was saying, we're down to 7. If that keeps continuing, I think it's going to be extremely difficult to get hold of a decent piece of stone. extremely pricey to get hold of a piece of stone. And that, with the legislation now with health and safety driving you into smaller and smaller sort of crevices of work that you're actually allowed to work, I can see the future is going to be difficult for small businesses and people like myself who like to work on their own, because they're not going to be able to afford to work in all aspects of their trade. And that's a bit of a shame. It's a shame if that happens. It's a shame for younger people who perhaps want to set up in the business because they're just not going to be able to afford to. And with the location, finding somewhere to work, it's going to be extremely difficult for them.
Each trade that we've seen so far, if done correctly, there was always left growth for the next generation. But in this case, once the stone has been taken, it is gone for good. But unlike the wood and the thatch that in time will rot and return to the ground, the stone will last forever. Now we're going to machine the part which will go onto the ground, the bottom of the leg. There we are, a little bit more to come out at the moment, so I'll carry on making that. Some people have the feel for wood. They can see a piece of wood and in their mind and their imagination they know straight away what they can carve with that. I know a man who not only carves, he does wood turning as well. So he's got something to sing about.
Oh, may we all rejoice upon this blessed morn. Praise God with heart and voice for sending us His Son. Oh, may we all rejoice upon this blessed morn. Praise God with heart and voice for sending us His Son.
My name is Tom Lane. You can see me singing with the Purbeck Village Choir, which is a West Gallery choir, because we sang in a gallery at the west end of churches before organs were introduced.
Oh, may we all rejoice upon this blessed morn. Praise God with heart and voice for sending us His Son.
The music we sing comes from the days of Thomas Hardy and before, and we had a band to accompany us, a band of musicians and a choir.
Worship Christ the newborn King. Worship Christ the newborn King. Worship Christ the newborn King.
My involvement with the choir is I'm one of the bass singers, of which there are about half a dozen. In total, we have probably about 20 to 25 singers, varying from who can come to the concerts, and about 15 instrumentalists, one of which is a most strange-looking instrument called a serpent, which is literally all wiggly like a serpent and produces a very deep sound, which of course is the bass note, which all we basses clutch on to for our note. That was one of my hobbies, but I also, for relaxation, do a lot of wood turning and a certain amount of wood carving. I've been involved with woodwork for the last 60 years. I've been turning for about 30 years and carving for the last 15 years. The penguin is my first attempt at wood carving, and then I went on to various other pieces of carving. to the kingfisher, the two owls we have here. The violin I carved for my wife because her father was a very fine violinist. And we have here a blacksmith. He's made out of one piece of wood. Nothing fell off and had to be glued on during the course of carving. You can combine turning with wood carving. This is a bowl in yew, a platter in yew that I have turned and then carved the leaves which we've painted to represent autumn leaves. We have also a small bowl in spalted beech, a wonderfully expressive timber which has all these wonderful veinings in them, and you can go on from there to a small bowl in walnut, English walnut, and you can go from things like that to a bowl which is quite well hollowed out in English oak, and you can see that you can make the bottom just as attractive as the top of the bowl. Another thing that you can make are wooden pens. These are very attractive and each one is unique, so there's no fear that anyone will run off with your pen. This bowl is in English ash, a timber much used by Dorset craftsmen for tool handles and very much favoured by wheelwrights for the parts of carts. Come with me to my workshop and I'll show you how to make a bowl like this. With wood turning, you're learning all the time. You can go on courses to learn the technique, but I'm purely self-taught. I'm going to show you how I made this bowl, which is in English ash. This is a comparable piece of timber, and we'll do the outside and the base first and then reverse it to do the inside of the bowl. The first thing that I'm doing is screwing up the bowl blank so that it is running evenly. Having trued the blank, I now increase the speed a little and readjust the tool rest, and then start to create the shape that I want. What I'm wanting to do now is to get the bowl base true and flat. Normally I would wear a face mask, but with the face mask and the helmet on, you wouldn't hear me speaking. Just need to adjust the tool rest. Dorset wood is different because of course you've got different minerals in the soil, and the character of the timber is sometimes made up from the minerals that the tree will pick up from the soil. And see if we're coming anywhere near flat. Yes. Now I want to make the recess for the chuck. Different tools for different parts of the operation. I now need to see if I've made my recess the correct size to mount on the chuck. So what we'll have to do for a moment is to stop the lathe just for a check. Yes, I think that's fine. We'll change over now to a scraper. You reckon to wait a year for every inch of thickness of the timber for it to dry naturally in the open air. And normally they would cut a tree down to 4-inch thickness planks, so that you've got 4 years for the timber to dry. Right, that seems as if it's given me the shape that I want. Yes, I think we can sand it now. What I'm going to use now to sand it, I'm going to use some food safe oil, so that whilst I'm sanding it, I'm not going to get too much dust. Kiln dried, the timber is put in basically a great big oven, and the majority of the moisture is sucked out of it very, very fast, down to about 10 or perhaps 12%. But I much prefer to use air-dried timber if I'm able to get it. I think it's much more, shall I say, creamier to use if it's air-dried. Right, now I need to remove the whole item from the lathe to re-chuck it. Now we use a different sort of chuck, an expanding chuck. Make sure that's safe. Then we will mount this . Yeah, that seems nice and firm. Now we want to get the inside shape. we'll just stop the lathe and check that we're going in the right direction. Yes, I think now I can oil it and sand it. I think now we can take it off the lathe and see what we've got. So that's quite a simple operation. We just go like that, and there we have that one, and there we have the one I made earlier. There's a slight difference, but when you make things by hand they always turn out slightly different.
Glory be to God on high, and to the earth be peace.
The wood does tell you what it wants you to do with it. Shall we say that's the spirit of the wood telling you what to do?
And never cease.
There we are, so that part's all right. All I've got to do is machine that part out there, and then we'll have another leg ready to go with the other one. You know, when you think that man invented the wheel, and of course the Romans, they made the roads for us, and we invented the cart, which could be pulled by a horse. But of course, horses working on a hard road started to damage their hooves. So therefore they realised that they had to be shod. This was done by a man called a farrier. We have a very good farrier in Dorset, and I want you to see him working with a horse. Normally when actors work with animals, the animal always upstages them. But in this case, I want to see horse and man working in harmony.
My name's Paul Whitmarsh. I'm a farrier. I live in East Stoke, on the south side of the River Frome. We've been working here now for 22 years. Got a very successful business shoeing horses and general blacksmithing. I served my apprenticeship in Shaftesbury, so not too far away. That'd take about 10 minutes to get hot. In the meantime, I'll go and cut some steel off for the horse that's coming in, and then we'll go on from there. We just select the steel here. It's all different sizes. The horse in question needs 12 inches of steel on the front feet and 11 inches of steel on the back ones. We'll switch the guillotine on. There's all different sections of steel. This particular one's 3/4, 3/8. You can get 5/8, 5/16, 3/4, 7/16, 7/8 by half, 3/4 by half, and it all depends on the weight, the type of animal and the work that they're doing that will determine what size section of steel it needs. The width of the shoe is quite important because the horse that's coming in is a thoroughbred, and it's not so much about the thickness of the shoe, but it's about the width. And when I say about the width, it is quite important on thoroughbreds to have a lot of support on the back of the foot. They're quite flat-footed, and this presents long-term lameness in the future. This is something that all farriers have to bear in mind when they're actually shoeing horses. The longest bars are obviously for the front feet. They're slightly rounder than the back feet, so it takes a slightly more steel to cover that area. And what we do now is just find the centre of the steel, not by measurement, but the old trick of balancing. And just give it a smack. That leaves a mark in the steel. So when that comes out of the forge, when it's hot, we can clearly see that. And then we can put our clips on the shoes in the centre of the bar.
on average you get through about 3.5 tonne of coal a year. We always tend to have 2 shoes in at a time, so one's heating up while we're working on the other one. The only thing is, doing it this way, you can actually make 2 shoes for 1 foot, so you have to be careful. This section of steel, you have a look down through, is beveled, slightly flat one side and beveled the other. The beveled edge is for the inside of the foot. Now the reason for this is that any dirt won't get compact and stick in the horse's foot, and the outside is a flat, and this is what you call a fuller down through, and this is what gives a grip on road surfaces for the horse's foot, and also allows the nail heads to seat down in there so they don't wear the nail heads off first. The first bend we do on a shoe is a toe bend. I'm actually doing the back shoes first. On the back shoes, we just take that edge off there, and that's what we call safing off. And the reason we're going safing off for is that the back feet, in case they strike into the front feet, you won't get a sharp edge of metal cutting into the skin or the back of the hoof. We're just going to put the nails in. This is the outside branch of the shoe, so we tend to put 4 nails in here and only 3 nails on the inside branch. The reason for that is the horse's central of gravity moves down the inside of his legs, and there is more expansion on the inside of the hoof than the outside. We don't want to restrict that expansion, because it ends up with foot problems later on in life. When I'm making these shoes, when I'm putting the holes in, I'm looking down through, and this stamp is angled to the opposite angle that I need for the horse's hoof. You can buy machine-made shoes now from Korea and what have you, but they tend to stamp the nails straight down in, and that creates problems when you nail it on a horse's foot. The horse's foot isn't upright, it's on an angle, and if you can get those nails to go in at that angle, you create an easier working environment, and it puts less stress on the horse's hoof when you're driving nails in. It's still a wonder to me who the first chap was that ever tried this. I wouldn't have liked to have been holding the horse at the time that he was driving nails in for the first time. When we're actually working the forge, when I'm working here, I'm also aware of what's going on behind me, because it's quite and all too easy to turn around and go and get your other shoe out of the fire and find it's in 2 halves. It's just got too hot and it's melted. You can waste so much time waiting for the shoes to heat up, but at the same time you can waste so much time just melting them, so it's just a question of getting the timing right. It doesn't always work. I've been doing this now for 22 years and even though I get it wrong. This is the clips we're putting on here, 2 on the back, 1 on the front, put it on the side. This is a cat's head hammer. It's got little lumps on the side, and this is what I hammered the clip out with.
There's one there. Now they come up the side of the horse's hoof and help stabilise the shoe on the horse's hoof. You can do it without clips, but it puts a lot more stress on the nails, and sometimes the nails actually shear off without those clips on. The reason we put 2 clips on a horseshoe on the back and only 1 on the front is because the back feet, a lot of power goes down through his back feet to get his forward motion, but it also twists when it's putting that power on. So you need something that stops the shoe from twisting on the horse's foot. On the front foot it doesn't matter so much because all that action is forwards and backwards. Now that's one back shoe ready to go on a horse's foot now. The reason it's making the horseshoes before the horse actually arrives at the forge is because it cuts the time down. The horse is stood in here waiting to be done. Horses are a little bit renowned for behavioural problems, so the less time they're actually hanging around, the better we are. So this is why I've done this before, and I'm just basically checking over the shoes to make sure the nail alignments are okay. It's the right width across for the horse that's coming in. Different types of shoes we put on the horses now. They range from thermoplastic, steel, aluminium. Things have moved on from the old days, and I think the massive investments within the equine industry now have definitely influenced all walks of life. Everything that is involved with the equine industry, from saddles to riding equipment, right and down to the shoes. Right, so there you go. There you go. Have a look then. There you go. Oh no. We have to be on the ball to what we supply to the owners and the customers now. The horses are asked to do far greater performances than what they did in the past. But he's okay, he's not too lame or nothing like that underneath. That would be 65 quid for a set of shoes. Yeah, for that's you know, like making them up and fitting them, complete job, 65 quid a set. Right, so they do vary. I'm not the cheapest.
He's a bit stiff, Deb. He's been eating too much grass, has he?
The cheapest ones are like the people that buy the ready-made shoes in from Korea, and they can buy those sets. They can buy a set of shoes for £4, a pound each. Well, I can't even compete against making those for that, so and I don't even bother because they're rubbish. And this is why a lot of people have a lot of trouble with their horses' feet. Not so much now, but they will do in the future. You know, because all the ailments that is causing arthritic problems because they don't fit the horse's foot at all.
And his feet have been grown anyway. Right, come on then, Tiger. Try again. That's it. You got it. So we're cutting all this away now. This is the excess hoof that is growing. A bit like our fingernails, actually. It keeps growing all the time. So just taking this back to get it level again. Just rasping this, take off all the high spots. And that's ready to receive the shoe that we've made, which are getting hot in the fire at the moment again. And the reason we burn them on is because the metal is easier to shape once it's hot to fit the foot exactly. And also it leaves a little burn mark around this area to show that the shoe is actually touching the horse's hoof and there's no gaps underneath. Good luck. Okay, what I'm going to do now then is just take these shoes, just shape them up a little bit, make sure the nail holes are clear, level the shoe, take that to the horse's foot, fit the shoe. I might have to come back for a little alteration, and then once all 4 shoes are fitted, then we'll get on and nail them on. Just clear the nail holes. Right, two. Come on then. That's it. Steady now. That's a good fit. The shoe fits well. There's little pimples on the horse's foot which indicate where the nails are going to go, and we've got a nice brain mark all the way around so there's no gaps under the shoe. That's what I'm looking for basically. Right. The nails, special horseshoe nails, if you have a look down through, you've got a square head, and on the point they're bevel one way. It's very important to get that bevel the right way in the shoe. That bevel encourages the nail to come out through the horse's foot. If it's around the wrong way, it goes into the horse's foot and causes a lameness. So we just check the nails, just check them in the horseshoe before we start, make sure it fits. And I'm quite pleased. And the angle of the nail here corresponds to the angle of the horse's foot if you turn it up that way. What did it do? Let's see if I can crack this bottle of pooch and actually nail it on. Come on then. Good lad. Good boy. What I do, the nail comes through the hoof wall on the side and I just, what I call, wring the nail off so it doesn't go through my leg basically. And later on we'll just clench those over. And that hopefully hold the shoe in place for another 8 weeks. I don't know.
Oh no, it seems a little bit tense for some reason. With experience, you can tell within the first couple of taps on a horse's foot is any good, as in any resistance in the nail. It shows that you're actually nailing into a decent bit of hoof and not an old crack. That's it. Okay, that's him then, all finished. Hi, Deb. Yeah, that's it. Good. That's another satisfied customer. They'll be back in about 8 weeks' time and have another set of shoes on. If they get on and ride it as they should do, they should be absolutely wore out, so there'll be another satisfied customer.
Well, there we are, there's the finished leg. To smooth it off at the end, I've picked up on the ground some of the actual sawdust, some of the wood which we've cut off. Now, by using that, that is smoothed that all together now. Now that leg is ready to be assembled and varnished. So there we are, the finished article. So that is the one which will marry up with the other one here. No two legs were ever spot on. As I say, making a three-legged stool is ideal. Crafts have always been a way of life in Dorset. If you want to be rich, you'd never take this line of business. You have to be prepared to work long hours. You have to be dedicated and be prepared once again to work in all winds and weather. We saw what happened with the button industry. Certain crafts such as the hurdle maker and the thatcher are under pressure at all times due to the increased cost of reed or the rentings of land that the hazel copse grow on. Each craft there are people looking to see if they can undercut the price or by using inferior materials so that they can get into the market. Consider all the years the properties have been thatched. Farmers have been using hurdles. It proves there's only one way to make anything, and that is the proper way with a Dorset craftsman. Stephen Brown himself can trace his ancestors back to 1550, which is a marvellous thing when they started off as hurdle makers. That gives us over 450 years of an established company. You don't want any more confidence than that. So when you're ready to purchase, why not pick a Dorset craftsman?